Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altition, Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Family Law. Today, I'm here with Brad Baldridge, a college funding specialist, to talk about college planning for co-parents and financial strategies to save for your kids' college education. So, Brad, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you.
Before we start and get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're doing, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been in the financial industry for most of my career. And about 15 years ago, I started getting involved with some of my clients around the college side of things. And I realized that there's a lot of challenges there, and it was just getting more challenging because, 15 years ago, college was expensive. It's gotten a lot worse since then. But that's when those prices started going up and it started becoming a much bigger deal. And as I was working with families, I realized that there's a lot you can do, but most people don't understand how it works because there's a lot of moving parts with need-based aid and merit aid and that type of thing. And the more I got involved in it, the more I realized that there's a lot of opportunity there. So about 2004, I think I launched my podcast, and I've got a website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, where we have a bunch of resources, and we're building a course, and we're just, again, trying to get the word out that there is help for families. I've been doing it, one-on-one with families as an advisor for 15 years, but we're also, like I said, trying to get some free resources and other things out there, just so people have a chance, so to speak, because it's an overwhelming proposition for many families now.
Oh, God, yes. It's so interesting. And you mentioned the rising cost of college. And it makes me think back, my freshman year at Portland State University was $87 a credit. So you don't get that anymore. But let's start with college planning, just kind of that kind of concept. And, that's a tough one for parents. I mean, figuring out how to pay for their kids' college, when to start paying, when to start saving, how much to plan for, what needs to be done. And, with divorced or co-parents, I imagine there's a whole added layer of difficulty involved. And so I guess the first thing I'm going to ask is, what do you start by telling a co-parent how to get ready for college for their kids?
Right. Well, yeah, let's start with the very broadest category, which is just parents in general need to deal with college. And there's two stages. There's what I call late stage planning, which is when you have a high school student, maybe ideally sophomore you can start, or even freshman. Many families don't start till end of junior year, which I feel is too late. But at some point, you're going to have to visit colleges, figure out how to apply to college, apply for financial aid, negotiate with the schools, and then ultimately, get it started and send your kid off to college. So there's a lot of steps in there that all happen during high school. That's late stage. Then early stage is, well, I've got a kindergartner, a second grader, maybe we're just pregnant now, whatever it might be. And college is coming someday, so maybe we should save and invest or come up with some sort of college savings. That's good too, but no matter how well you did in the early stage, whether you've saved a big pile of money or you haven't saved anything at all, you're going to have to do the late stage planning either way. Now, when you add divorce and co-parents on there, now it's even more complicated because now you've got essentially potentially two families or two incomes, and it gets more challenging around need-based aid. How do you fill out the forms? Who's going to be the primary parent? That type of thing. There's a little additional politics about who's going to do the work and, who's actually going to pay the bills. And it's a stressful time because a lot of times there's not as much money to go around. As you divide into two households, a lot of expenses go up, and a lot of times college is one of the things that gets the short shaft, so to speak, in that process.
Yeah. I see that. We see that all the time. And one of the things we see is parents sometimes, and generally, the parent who may have custody, not really coming to an agreement or understanding even the cost of college. And I know you talk a lot about the real cost of sending your kids to college. What does that mean? What does that entail, the real cost?
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, there's the big numbers out there, right? So if you looked at tuition, some places just tuition is $50,000, $60,000, and total cost, which is what we typically work it with, which is tuition, room and board, books, fees. The total cost, the most expensive schools have crossed 85,000 now, and your average state school is about 25,000 right now. So most families, somewhere between 25 and 85, that's the top line price. But to make it a little more complicated, of course, colleges, again, many colleges will offer some form of scholarships or discounts, which means your net cost could be much less than that or not, just depending on if you qualify for the discounts or not. So that's, I think, a big challenge. Is it's like shopping for a car where you're not going to pay the price in the window, but in this particular shopping experience, it could be half or a quarter, or it could be full price. You just don't know until after you've gone through the process. So that's one of the things I help families do, is figure out, well, what's the real price going in? Because if you knew applying to that expensive private school, they were going to be very generous and their net cost was going to be 25, just like the local state school, then many parents would say, well, great, let's do it. But if you knew it was going to be full price at 72,000, many parents would say, no, let's not do it. So figuring that out ahead of time can be done. It's a little bit of work, and our tools are getting better, but that's one step in the process, is just understand, will I get need-based aid? Will I qualify for merit aid? What about outside scholarships? How is this all going to come together? And figure it out in enough time where you can actually make decisions.
Getting down to decision time. Let's talk a little bit about, as part of the cost, I guess, and the financial aid part. You mentioned the term need-based aid, and that's a term that I don't know that people necessarily know what that means. And scholarships, loans, all that kind of stuff. I imagine that, like you had said, that's parents who are married and together, and they're in the same household and they talk every night. It's hard for them. There's, imagine, right. It's got to be really difficult when you're talking about, divorced couples or even blended families where there's maybe now a second spouse and some other kids.
Yes, exactly. So it can get pretty complicated. I think one of the key issues is there's various levels of cooperation. So sometimes in a divorce situation, one spouse is holding the college bag, I guess is the way I would say it, where either, again, sometimes one parent doesn't have the resources or whatever, and they've essentially said, I just can't participate in college, or they maybe could participate, but they choose not to and say, it's just not my problem. Both of those happen. But then the parent that cares the most is saying, well, I believe in college and I guess I have to make it happen by myself. So that's one type of challenge where we have to make college happen despite the other parent not cooperating and maybe not paying a share or whatever it might be. On the other end of the spectrum, I've seen families that as part of the divorce or after the divorce, they're fully cooperative and they will do whatever it takes to make sure, college is not the thing that takes the impact. They're willing to continue to live in a house together, even though they're divorced, or they're willing to live in small apartment or sell the family vehicles or do whatever it takes in order to just make college happen. And of course, many places in between, but the more cooperation, obviously divorce is not a good situation, but at least sometimes it will help in the college realm, in that there might be a smaller income and you might qualify for more aid, as an example. I've seen that situation quite often where, I had a mom who was going back to school herself because of the divorce. So because of that, their income was very low for a couple of years. And those were the years that one of the students was in college as well. And because the income came in very low, that student qualified for essentially a full ride at a particular school. because they were under a line. I think it was like they had to be under 56,000 in income, which they were able to do. And they locked in a full ride for their daughter at the local state school. Now that was a happy coincidence. They didn't plan it that way at the beginning, but once we saw the opportunity, we worked hard at it.
Obviously, cooperation, like you said, is better than not. I mean, in all phases of co-parenting, but with that kind of big number out there, it seems like it would make sense for people who aren't normally cooperating very much to really dig down and do that. And so let's kind of talk a little bit about the financial aid, how that just in general works, and what makes people get more or less financial aid, and maybe how co-parents can maximize their ability in that situation to get financial aid. I mean, what is financial aid? You hear it, but what does it mean? Loans? Does it mean scholarships? Does it mean money from the government? It's a term out there that I think a lot of people use without kind of knowing what exactly it even is.
Right. And it's all of the above. It's free money, grants and scholarships. It's work study was another program where the student earns it. It's loans to the student. It's loans to the parent. Scholarships from the college. So there's all different components to it. And again, a lot of people look at a loan and say, well, that's not as helpful. And that's true. A loan is not the best option. You'd much rather have a scholarship or a grant or something you don't have to pay back. But the reality is it's going to be a combination of all those things typically. So the way it works, generally, there's two main categories for aid. One is need-based and one is merit-based. So need-based is based on the income and the assets of the family. So it's based on typically income that shows up on your taxes. Your AGI is what is used. And you put that, again, when you fill out a financial aid form, that's the purpose, right? You fill out the form so that they get all the data so they can calculate whether or not you need aid. So they're going to look at the student's income and assets, and they're going to look at parents' income and assets. Well, a typical student rolling out of high school and going to college, their income and assets are essentially zero or close enough to zero that they're just not going to matter. So then they look at parents' income and assets. So in a typical married situation, you have a joint tax return and you use that, and that's your income. And then the assets, obviously both parents own it together. All the assets are considered. It doesn't matter who owns it. Now, generally things like retirement plans don't count, and your primary residence doesn't count, and a few things like that don't count. And what does count are 529s and other savings plans for college, investments, businesses and real estate. That's not your primary residence. So a few things like that. So it gets complicated in divorce.
Yeah. I was going to say, the term parents, and is it just the physical parents, the biological parents? If, let's say, you're remarried, and is it household income? I mean, household expenses, can that kind of adjust how this whole thing works?
Yes, right. So a typical college is going to use the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. And that form requires that the parent where the student has spent 50% or more of their time with, that's the primary parent. So now we could choose that by having the student stay one place or the other in a typical joint custody situation. Now, if you're in different states or something, it would be hard to do that because it would be wherever the student's going to school, that parent would probably have to be on it. But in typical co-parenting, you might be able to pick which parent. So it would be their income and their assets. Generally, the other parent is not included on the FAFSA. Now, to complicate things, about 300 schools also use what's called the CSS profile, which is an additional financial aid form. And for that form, many of those schools want to know about both parents and all new spouses. So they want to know income and assets for everybody. Now, and I forgot to mention on the FAFSA too, if the primary parent is remarried, then now we're back to a joint situation, and that new parent's income or new step parent income and assets would be included as well. And no matter if there's a prenup or something like that, they don't care. It's not a way to avoid paying for college, unfortunately. So many parents with college age kids might delay their second marriage a year or two until college is resolved, so to speak.
That would make sense. I mean, again, you're saving a ton of money. You mentioned assets and whose assets may make a difference, and income. And how does that fit in the world of divorce and dividing assets, spousal support, those kinds of things? I mean, is those things you can work with to actually help the situation?
Absolutely. Right. I mean, so if it's prior to just finalizing the divorce, yes, you may say, again, as an example, a retirement plan may not count, whereas just a mutual fund or a brokerage account, let's say you have $100,000 in a XYZ mutual fund and you have $100,000 in an IRA. Well, they may be valued the same as far as the divorce is concerned, but one of them is an asset that's going to impact your aid and one of them's not. So if the primary parent takes the IRA and the other parent takes the non-IRA, that may improve your odds of getting aid. As an example.
There's something I wouldn't have thought of.
Right. And then oftentimes in a divorce situation, there's college savings. And from a divorce situation, a lot of times they just say, well, that's really the kid's money. That's for college. They kind of ignore it. They don't worry about what happens to it, as far as it now, which is fine, because if it is spent on college, it doesn't belong in the marital asset decisions. The challenge, though, that isn't discussed is whoever owns it gets to decide if it's being spent or not, often. So occasionally we see some politics around, well, I don't want to spend this money on that school. I don't like that school. And whoever owns it, they get to make the decision. It's their money. They get to decide. They can also potentially, abscond the money. A lot of times there's no rule. And again, in the divorce agreement, you might have rules against something like that. But college money can be uncolleged. If you're married and just a typical family, you can choose to not use your money for college if you want. So similar would apply there. But so who has the control? But then the other part of it is if it's the primary parent that owns it, well, now it's an asset that gets reported on the form and it's counted against you. Whereas if it's the other parent, then it may not count against you. So there might be competing interests there. Who has control and decisions, and where does it make most sense for as far as aid's concerned? And that's why I'm saying if there's a lot of cooperation, then we can, do the best as far as working the numbers and coming up with the best scenario, so to speak, for whatever schools is going on and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like especially parents, it seems to me, with kids in high school. And so they've got money maybe saved, but they've got, not a lot more time. And they're getting divorced, and that's not an uncommon situation.
Yes.
You're there stepping in before they sign on the dotted line and the divorce is finalized, would be a lot more valuable than after. Not that it's not valuable after, but I mean, there's a lot of things you can do before you sign that divorce decree.
Yes. I mean, certainly you want to avoid the big mistake. Sometimes you do something and it just blows up your income and then just wipes out your odds of getting aid. But you didn't have to do. It made sense from a divorce perspective, but you didn't think about the college perspective. Like taking a big chunk out of a retirement plan would be a common thing where, well, we get to avoid penalties, but it is going to be taxable, and that'll, that can have a big impact on aid. So you want to avoid certainly something that's very detrimental. And then sometimes if we've got, time and cooperation, it might make sense to say, well, let's divide it differently with financial aid intentions, so to speak. So we're going to make it better for financial aid.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the caution there is just because you make it better, that it doesn't always result in more aid. That's the other piece of the puzzle, right? Sometimes you go to a college, they say, well, you deserve 10,000 in aid. And then you turn your life upside down and do all kinds of different things. And they say, oh yeah, now you deserve 20,000 in aid, but we only have 10. So you still only get 10. So you got to make sure that what we're doing is reasonable. The other part of it, of course, is you hide all your money for financial aid and now you don't have anything to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So that's the other challenge, is you need to have, resources available, as part of the divorce transition, potentially buying and, redoing real estate and all that kind of stuff takes cash often. So finding that balance of, having enough to survive and do the other goals and minimizing impact on college as well.
You talked about merit scholarships as well. Is that something that you plan for? I mean, is that a thing that's also involved in this planning?
Yes. Now it's not as impacted by divorce. Merit is based on the student, and whether or not the student's divorced or the student's parents are divorced or not, usually it wasn't going to have much of an impact on whether or not you qualify. But for sure, there's lots of colleges out there that say if your student looks like this, they get 10,000 off. But if they look like that, they get 20,000 off. And they look like this, they get 30,000 off. And if your student is going to get 30,000 off, that changes the math pretty dramatically at many schools, where a $50,000 school is now a $20,000 school, and now it might be a low cost option.
Are there things that the parents can do, let's say in that kind of, I call it weird because it was, some of it made sense and some of it didn't, but it worked. That sort of sophomore, junior, senior year, that parents can kind of cooperate and work together, especially if they're divorced, that can help their kids on either the merit or the another kind of scholarship or loan.
Right. Absolutely. Right. I mean, again, so as you roll into the process, there's just a lot to do. So college planning, another way to think about it is there's things that the students do. So they're going to have to fill out their applications. They're going to have to write the essays. They have to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. That's their responsibility. The parents have their responsibility, which is, well, how are we going to pay for this? And figuring out need-based aid is not a typical student's not going to be able to get involved in that real well. So understanding aid, understanding loans, understanding how you're going to pay for it. And then there's things that you do together, which are, you visit the colleges, you do the research together, you hopefully decide together and that type of thing. So that's the process. Now, if you've got two parents, if they can, if they can be cooperative and agree, that makes it easier than if they're using college as one more thing to, beat each other up with, and the student's stuck in the middle, unfortunately.
Do parents ever come to you and say, we want to go to this college, we want to go to that college because they like, maybe they like the football team, they like the way it looks. And, but there's colleges out there that have, because like you said, they all have different sort of evaluation processes. I mean, do you get involved in kind of, well, maybe we should look at this other kind of stuff?
Well, right. Yeah. So again, two-step process again. Figure out what the net price of colleges are going to be, and then pay for it efficiently if that's the one we pick. Right. So we may roll into it and say, these are the 6 colleges. These 4 are, expensive, and these 2 are lesser as far as cost. But some parents are going to say, I still like the more expensive one. I mean, if you look at the cars people drive, some people will spend $100,000 on the car. We know that because we see them on the road, right?
Yeah.
So it happens. Now, other people look at that and say, well, that's a bad, terrible way to spend money. Why would you waste your money on an expensive car? But then that person goes on elaborate vacations, so it's not our job really to judge, which ones make sense, which ones don't, and I always give the example, if you're going to give up the lake home to spend crazy money on college, okay. Now, if you're going to give up retirement to spend crazy money on college, that's a different question, right? And are there other options, right? Sometimes, no matter what, some families are going to end up spending, 20, 25, 30,000, no matter where they go. And then they say, but here's a college we like that's 32,000. So really we're talking about an extra 7,000, not, geez, 32,000 is a lot of money. It's like, yeah, it is. But our other option was 25. So what we're really talking about is a net 7. But of course, that's that slippery slope. Well, if 32 is okay, well, what about 35? And if 35 is okay, what about 38? And on up through the numbers. But
yeah,
so it is a challenge that I work with a lot of families on of, then you look at, if you've got multiple children, how are you going to be fair? If you spend 30,000, I had a dad a couple of years ago, his oldest of 4 wanted to go to NYU. She hit it out of the park as far as scholarships are concerned. So the net cost was going to be 35,000 at a school that normally is 70 plus. So, but dad was looking at that and going, 35,000 times 4 years is a lot of money. And if I do it for one, do I have to do it for all? So a lot of money times 4 kids is really a lot of money. Now, he was a reasonably successful mid-management, had decent income and had already been saving aggressively for retirement. So we figured out that if he wanted to, he could make it happen. Sometimes the math comes in and says, well, you can do it, but then instead of retiring at 65, you're going to retire at 75.
Yeah.
And then that's a different question than if it's like, well, I can retire at 62, but if I do this, I retire at 64, which is fine because I plan on working till 66 anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody's case is a little different. But I think where most people struggle is they make the decisions emotionally and deal with the aftermath after the fact.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. I was going to say, I imagine it's in terms of the process, getting to know the costs first before you go try to, buy the car or search for the college, right. At least get you grounded in what you can and can't, or maybe won't, or watch, or look
right.
at.
Well, exactly. And if you, as an example, if you're doing college on some sort of budget, it's like saying I'm going to go car shopping on a budget. Well, you may want to stay off the BMW lot if you can't afford BMWs.
BMWs doesn't give scholarships.
Exactly. So, that's kind of the analogy, right? And where I think parents really get nervous and frustrated is, all right, I decided to buy this car for $50,000. Then I discovered that the competitive car across the street, which is essentially the same car, was only 25,000. I just didn't know it was 25,000 because the sticker said 50 on both of them. But had I known across the street, I would get a $25,000 discount. Whereas here I didn't. I would have walked across the street in a heartbeat because as far as they're equal, right? I think that's where for sometimes, an education's an education, they're all equal. Once you do the shopping and compare colleges, now all of a sudden they don't become equal anymore. You like one more than the other for whatever reason. But in an ideal situation, your low cost option is the one you love. Yeah. But not always. Sometimes the one you love is more expensive, and then you have to decide, is it worth, I like this school because it's, it's got a great football team. Okay, well, is that worth $10,000 a year?
Yeah, plus buying the seats.
Right. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Again, I don't know, but it is a decision that's actually an informed decision versus, we applied to these 5 schools. We were denied at 2, we were waitlisted at 1, and the 2 that accepted us are crazy expensive. Now what do we do? Well, we don't want to be in that situation because that usually by then we're really late in the process and it's hard to do a do-over. You delay a year, you go ahead and pay the big price. You take a gap year, you find a school that'll take a really late application, which usually isn't of the same quality sometimes, depending on what's going on. So I get calls like that every year of, I'm trying to find all the loans that my student was going to take to pay for school. It's like, well, surprise, students don't have unlimited loans. Parents have unlimited loans.
Yeah. Yep.
And that kind of stuff.
Oh my gosh. Well, of course, we just blew through 30 minutes. This was really good. Before we have to say goodbye, is there anything, you might want to say, to people out there listening who are, either contemplating a divorce, getting ready to get divorced, or in the process of the divorce, or even have been divorced and maybe remarrying, well, think about this.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So any marital change is going to have an impact. So you may want to figure out if that change is going to have a good impact or a bad impact before you make commitments one way or the other. The other thing is to start early because, for a typical family, I encourage them to start sophomore year and get to work. If you're divorced or separated or blended or all these other challenges, that just makes it more complicated. So there's lots of things you can do where your student maybe isn't ready, right? It's too soon to visit a school. They're only a sophomore. They're not mature enough yet. You don't feel, but that doesn't prevent mom and dad from trying to start working it out and understanding what your options are and building those lines of communication and determining, how we're going to pay for this if it hasn't been figured out yet.
Yep. And that's where they can come to you. They don't have to wait until their kids starting, to visit colleges to come to see you.
That's correct, right? Often, I had a parent with twin juniors and twin sophomores. And it's like, oh, that's a lot of work. You can start as early as you can because visiting, doing 4 college plans in 2 years is a lot of work. And there's lots of visits. There's lots to do. Chances are they're going different directions. Yep. It just got complicated.
Oh my God, I can't imagine. 4 schools, maybe 4 schools. Oh my God, for 4 years. It's a lot of fun.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we're gone. We have to go. Wonderful conversation. Again, thank you so much to talk about this, and love to have you back to talk about more stuff, because I imagine we kind of had an overview and you can really bury into details on various things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's all kinds of free resources at my website for those that just want to jump in and get involved.
Tell us your website again.
It's tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. We've got a podcast, cost of colleges by state, scholarship guide for busy parents, free newsletter, all kinds of things that people can take advantage of. And you can just reach out through the website if you have, need some particular help as well.
I love it. Well, again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It was a real pleasure. And thank everyone else for joining us today. And as always, if anyone has further questions on today's topic, you can post it here. We can get you connected with Brad. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and be well.